and it just takes just a second. Good evening and welcome. I'm Melissa Schwartz with the PV United Parent Council, and we welcome you to another presentation by our gifted department and our gifted committee here with United Parent Council. I'm going to introduce Elizabeth Warner, our mentor teacher, is that your title? With the gifted department, and she'll get us started this evening. We will take questions later on. If you would put them in the chat, I will be happy. Elizabeth and I will both be asking those questions towards the end. You have been muted just because this is being recorded, and would recommend that when you ask your questions, you make them generic questions, if you would, please. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Beghetto to you. He is an internationally recognized expert in creative thought and action in educational settings. He is a professor at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College here at Arizona State University. He's also the editor for the Journal of Creative Behavior, editor for the Review of Research in Education, a series editor for Creative Theory and Action in Education. And I think you'll find this very interesting. He is a creative advisor for the Lego Foundation and the Cartoon Network. We've had a very full week with Dr. Beghetto, where he worked with our Digital Learning Center students and teachers, and then again with our gifted teachers on Tuesday. So thank you again for joining us, Dr. Beghetto. We are anxious to get started.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thank you, Melissa, and thank you, everyone, for joining me tonight. I hope you're having a good evening. So I'm going to share some slides here just to kind of get us started. And at any time, yes, feel free to put any questions into the chat. Okay, so what we're talking about tonight really is this question of, as parents, how do we help our children develop an unshakable sense of creative confidence in learning and life? And so I think we'll have to unpack, what do we mean by creative confidence? I know creativity is a word that sometimes has a lot of different meanings, but it's a well-defined word in the research literature. There's been over 100 years of work looking at, what do we mean by creativity? Is it just in the arts? Does it go beyond the arts? And so we're going to explore what creativity means, and I encourage you to think about your own definitions about creativity, and why might it be important for young people to develop their creative confidence now and into the future. So that's what we're going to be exploring, and we'll just dive right in. So the first premise here is this idea that all young people and all people have creative potential. It is a survival skill. Creativity is something we need to do when what we've been doing in the past no longer works, or when we want to do something new, when we want to innovate. So innovators, entrepreneurs, it starts with creativity, right? And so as humans, it's something that we all have. And there's even research on, non-humans. There's researchers that have looked at like animal creativity, non-human animal creativity, and AI. There's questions about that. Is artificial intelligence able to act creatively? And so there's a variety of different ways people have looked at this, but we're going to focus on young people tonight. And so this initial assertion is that we all have creative potential, but what again is creativity? So these are just a couple fun memes, if you will. You can find them on the internet, but I just want you to think about whether or not this is an example of creativity. So these are little assignments that students get from worksheets. So one example might be in a science class, a kid will be asked to draw a plant cell and identify its most important parts. And then we have, what if we have a kid that did this, drew a flower behind bars, right? A plant in a cell, no windows, iron bars. It's humorous. Is it creative? That's an interesting question to think about. I'll give you one more. So this is in math. It's a quadrilateral worksheet. And so this student, Hope, is being asked to name quadrilaterals and identify them as either a rectangle, rhombus, and so on. And so our student, Hope, here provides the names of these different quadrilaterals: Bob, Sam, Tedison's my favorite. So again, are these creative? I think they're kind of humorous. Are they creative? What would creativity researchers say about this? Well, what we say in the field of creativity studies is creativity is more than original. it's more than just being original. It's actually constrained originality. So the way we would look at this, some creativity researchers would say, well, those kids were definitely being original, but they weren't being creative within the constraints of that task, right? So they weren't meeting the task constraints. So it's not really original. It's not creative, although it's original. Now, other people might argue, and I think there's a case that could be made, if the kid's goal was to be funny, then they are being original and they're kind of meeting their own goal of being humorous in that case. But as a parent or as an educator, we might eventually want to know, does Hope actually know the quadrilaterals? And does the other kid actually know a plant cell, right? So I think this is an interesting thing that we sometimes see with our own kids, and educators see this with students. And we see this with people that we work with too. Sometimes they can be original, but it doesn't fit the context. And so how do we kind of think about creativity within constraints or constrained originality? That's one way to define creativity. Another way to define it that I think is fairly simple is creativity is really just different ways of solving a problem, meeting criteria, or attaining a goal. So again, it depends on the eyes of the beholder here. For the kid, the goal of being funny, that might have met that kid's criteria, but not the teacher's criteria. And then we might have a little tension that arises there. But that's how creativity researchers typically define creativity, is the idea of really it's about a blend between originality and meeting task constraints or doing something that's meaningful or useful or effective for the task, the problem at hand. So I hope this helps clarify what is meant by creativity. And I think it's useful to understand this because in the context of teaching or anything in life, there's always constraints, right? So I think the idea of thinking outside the box is not a good description of creativity, because oftentimes you have to think creatively inside the box. There's always going to be constraints. Now that might mean sometimes you realize you might need to build a better box. So part of that creativity might be we need to innovate and create something completely different. But again, different ways of solving a problem, meeting criteria, or attaining a goal. So my colleague, James Kaufman, and I, several years ago, we've looked at and kind of synthesized the creativity literature, and we came up with this 4C model. And I think this really helps us understand, well, how could a little kid be creative as compared to, an eminent creator like, Einstein in science, or you can think of all these different eminent legendary creators. I mean, obviously they're not on the same par as a little kid, but we have all seen, probably with our own children, and certainly educators have seen this, where kids are doing things that are really amazing within the context of that task, right? So what we try to do is help researchers and everyone understand that creativity is defined within a particular task or situation. So the first level of creativity that we talk about in this 4C model is what we call mini-C creativity. And so in mini-C creativity, the person who's judging creativity is really the individual. And so this occurs with highly accomplished creators, adults, but oftentimes kids. So whenever a kid learns something new and meaningful, we would say that that is, in fact, mini-C creativity. So even that kid Hope, that might have been mini-C creativity in naming those different quadrilaterals with actual names, right? So that's mini-C creativity. But as we start pushing creativity out into the world and we have other audiences and we have other goals that are maybe set by other people, then we want to get feedback from others. And this is where it moves to like little C creativity. So little C creativity is where other people in a particular context, so this could be in a classroom, this could be in the home, this could be in some setting that's not a professional setting, but it's recognized as, wow, that kid came up with something that's new and meaningful and different than what we're seeing in other fourth grade classrooms, or what's new and meaningful way of playing this sport on this sport field in this particular town or situation, right? So little C creativity is kind of everyday creativity. And these are things that we see really every day in ourselves and others. And so a lot of time when we're thinking about parenting and trying to support kids' creative confidence, one of the things we want to do is recognize and encourage our own children to express their own ideas and insights, even though that, they might be just unique to them and not to us, we can still validate that and say, wow, you learned a new kind of shading technique. I've never seen you use that. Now, other artists might use that shading technique, or mathematicians might have already solved the problem in that same way that you're solving it. But for that kid, it's the first time they've done that. So I think it's important to recognize when they're having those kind of aha moments. But if we want to help kids or anyone move from mini-C kind of personal creativity to everyday creativity, then we need to provide them with feedback. So I love eating and cooking. This is actually a picture of my daughter when we were making spaghetti together a long time ago when she was a little kid. She's a high schooler now. And what we want to do is, like, if a kid's making a meal and is really interested in cooking, for example. So again, creativity can be in any human endeavor. So it can occur in cooking. It can occur obviously in the sciences, the arts, mathematics, engineering, any human endeavor, sports. So let's say your child's really interested in cooking and prepares a dish for you, but it tastes horrible. So part of what we want to do is provide feedback to help them understand that even though they blended ingredients in a unique way, it also has to meet the criteria of being edible. So we can provide feedback like, well, maybe next time you make that, you won't use as much salt, or maybe you need to actually use salt. So it's through this kind of process of feedback that young people can understand, oh, okay, I can see how I can improve upon this and produce something that others see as a unique combination of ingredients that actually is edible and tastes good, right? So a lot of the time when we're working with our own children and young people, what we're trying to do is help them move from their own kind of aha moments and develop those into contributions that others might recognize as a unique contribution, but also meets the criteria. Now, so that's everyday and mini-C creativity. The other thing that we realize is that young people can actually make creative contributions that go beyond the everyday context and actually contribute to kind of professional levels of contribution. And so that's where we talk about Pro-C. So Pro-C creativity is where somebody's made a contribution to science. So maybe they publish a paper in a scientific journal and other scientists recognize that, wow, this is a new insight. Or maybe an artist has a gallery showing and, art connoisseurs and so on, and other artists see that as important work, or a professional athlete, has a new kind of technique or move, and others recognize that, and it really makes an impact on the field or domain. That's professional level creativity. Now, kids can do that. Kids can have ideas where they come up with an idea that can actually turn into a company, or can actually turn into something that improves their school or their community or their neighborhood or beyond, right? So kids have come up with inventions. Now, they might not have the domain expertise of other professional level creators, but that's where we can partner them with experts and get them working with experts and take their idea that's mini-C and actually advance it to Pro-C. So Pro-C is really about expertise. And if there's a kid that's really interested in a particular area, be it, let's say, engineering or medicine or the arts or whatever they're interested in, what we want to do is establish some Pro-C goals for them and help them understand what does it take to actually become a surgeon who comes up with a new surgical technique, for example. It takes many years of disciplined practice. You're probably going to have to go to medical school, and you're going to have to kind of know the discipline really, really well. Now, in the meantime, you might still have ideas, and we can partner you with those experts, and so that you can kind of see how do you go from an idea that you have and connect with other folks that can actually make a professional level contribution. So it is possible for kids to make Pro-C contributions, but the typical pathway is many years of preparation. And so, a professional plumber might have a very creative technique for dealing with a particular plumbing issue. And so again, that comes from many years of expertise. So it doesn't have to be professional. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to be a professional scientist that went to university, but certainly it could be that pathway. So there's a variety of different pathways that you can go from mini-C to Pro-C. And then there's this big C creativity. This is kind of legendary creativity. So this is usually bestowed on inventions or the entire body of work that somebody's done over the course of their lifetime, and they're seen as kind of legendary creators. And this is usually bestowed on people after they've passed on, right? So these are more aspirational. And I think it's still important for us to provide those examples for our own kids if they're really interested in cooking, to let them understand, like, okay, there's home cooking, there's what you're doing. We're working at helping you develop cooking that we can eat in the house, and maybe you can share with family and friends. And then there are professional cooks that are really doing professional work, and they're making innovations in the dishes, the presentation, the techniques. And then there are legendary chefs, for example, like Julia Childs. And so it's important to have those kind of aspirational goals to understand, like, what is the full trajectory in any domain? And this could be in anything: skateboarding, science, the arts, and so on. So it's really important to incorporate examples of biographies of legendary creators into the curriculum, or into just what we are doing, watching documentaries or reading books about biographies, having those kinds of conversations, so that kids can have these aspirational goals to understand what are the heights of creative accomplishment in a particular domain. So this is the 4C model of creativity. I think it can be helpful to understand how we work with young people in kind of developing their understanding of creativity and developing their creative confidence. So if you have any questions about that, you can feel free to drop that in the chat. So this is really what we're talking about when we're talking about creativity. And what I mean by all kids have creative potential, they're anytime they learn something new, they're operating at the mini C level. And then we can certainly see them operating at the little C level. And when I had an opportunity to visit 2 of the classes, the 7th and 8th grade classes, those kids were given an opportunity to generate ideas to help others. And some of them had ideas that maybe could turn into a potential business, or at least a project that could really make a positive and lasting contribution. So we saw in that moment, mini C ideas grow into little C and potentially pro C ideas if they were able to kind of bring those ideas to life. So now let's take a step back and understand, well, why might this be important? So this is an interesting phenomenon that I've seen both experientially, but it's also kind of supported in the research. When I was directing Innovation House at the University of Connecticut before I joined Arizona State University, I had students from every single major in there, from engineering to computer science to the arts to undeclared, but all the students in there were interested in innovation, and they were committed to it. It was a competitive program. They had applied to it. They lived in a dorm that was a dorm floor that was designated Innovation House. We met in a maker space below there. And all these students were interested in innovation, but they never had an opportunity to identify the problems that they wanted to solve and try to solve them themselves. And so they were kind of immobilized. They didn't have the confidence to actually pitch an idea, right? A problem, to identify a problem. We said, what problem do you want to try to tackle in Innovation House? If you want to start a company, what is your company going to be about? What is it going to offer to the world? If you want to start an organization, what is the issue or problem you're trying to tackle? And they would ask us, well, what should we do? And we said, no, this is an opportunity for you to be an innovator, not a spectator of your learning. And so it took us some time to realize that many of these students who were extremely excellent students, right, academically, just really had low creative confidence. And this has also been demonstrated in the research. So there's a fairly recent study here where these 2 researchers, they had some data of students that were graduating high school and they were accepted into university. So the admissions data, and they also had their high school performance data. And what they found is students' creative confidence, right, which is technically called creative self-efficacy. So this is the belief in one's ability to come up with new ideas, good ideas, your own imagination. So their creative confidence was looked at in relation to their high school rank. And what they found is that students that tended to have a higher high school rank, so graduated at the highest levels of their class, academically speaking, tended to have lower levels of creative confidence. And so what these researchers said is students who are more academically successful in high school may, based on their study, be less likely to consider themselves to be creative. Now, this is, of course, is on average. There's obviously students that have both and, but it's an interesting phenomenon to see this. And you might see this in your own kids, right? They might be really good at figuring out how to perform well in school, but when it comes to their own ideas, they might be a little bit unsure. right? They might lack that confidence. And that's problematic, especially if they're actually going to go out there and make a difference and leave their mark. So I find this to be kind of troubling. And it's been a question that I've often thought about. So how is it that kids might have this lower sense of creative confidence, particularly as they move through school, even if they're academically successful? And one of the reasons that I feel is a cause of this, and I've kind of looked at this in my work, is that what we do in school, but what we also do as parents, is we tend to overplan young people's learning and life experiences. So in other words, even when we plan vacations, we tend to sometimes plan those down to the last minute where there's no room for kind of creative emergence to occur. But certainly in the classroom, everything's almost planned down to the minute, where kids are being told what to do and how to do it and when to do it and so on, which is fine. I mean, students need to learn how to follow rules. I mean, obviously that's an important component of success, but when do kids really get the opportunity and are expected to identify their own problems to solve and their own ways of solving them? And I think that's when we start seeing creative confidence grow, is when we actually give them that experience. And this is just a little visual metaphor that kind of illustrates that, I think, pretty well, that when we have a really well-defined goal, sometimes the other possibilities that are right before us, that are actually present in our students, right, in our children, disappear right before our eyes. So this is a static image. It's called the Troxler Effect from perceptual psychology, but we're using it metaphorically here. So imagine that black dot is something you've planned, a learning experience or just a fun life experience you've planned for your child. And there's a lot of possibilities. Those kind of powdered colored dots around it are all the possibilities that could emerge, but this is the well-defined component. So I invite you now to stare at your screen at that little black dot and just let me know by dropping in the chat, for example, oops, I'll go back to that, dropping in the chat, what happens to those powdered colored dots that we're saying are metaphorical possibilities? So stare at that for a few moments. Anybody want to drop anything in there? So what ends up happening is that those powdered colored dots, which are possibilities, start disappearing before our eyes. If you stare at that dot long enough, the black dot, all the possibilities will disappear. They fade, and eventually they will all completely disappear, which is a pretty cool effect. But I think it's kind of troubling for us. And I think it could be a nice reminder for us that if we are so focused on getting this done, right, on having this experience, on, if you go to an amusement park, getting on this ride and this ride and this ride, then the other possibilities disappear right before our eyes. Now, the same is true if you just stare at one of those dots, then you kind of lose track of what your goal is. So what I'm trying to suggest here is this both and approach. Let's have goals and objectives and criteria and plans, but let's also keep our eyes open to the possibilities and be willing to maybe let go of a direction for a moment to explore a new possibility. And so I think we want to help our young kids do that, right? So they get so focused on the task at hand that they sometimes let go of the possibilities. So that's just a little bit visual metaphor. And so I want to kind of anchor that into this idea that typically in this place called school, and what kids learn is that success really is doing what's expected and how it's expected. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. That's, as parents, we want our kids to be able to follow rules. We don't want them inventing their own safety rules in the chemistry lab, for example. But we also want to give them the opportunity to meet goals in their own way. So I think sometimes one of the problems that we have on school assignments, for example, in school projects, is we have an expectation of what they should do. And students can meet that expectation, but they still fall short when it comes to grading because they didn't do it the way it was expected. And so I often invite teachers to think about, can we still have very clear criteria, but allow kids to meet that criteria in as many different ways as they can? And by doing that, that's when kids start seeing like, wow, I could come up with a different way of doing this that actually meets this goal. And I can learn kind of an already taught way. I can demonstrate I know how to do that, but I can also do it this way. And I think this is an important skill to have, particularly given how uncertain life is now and into the future. We want students to be able to say, well, this used to work, but it no longer works because, the game has changed. So now we need to be able to have confidence that we can actually still meet our goals in a different way. And I think that's really important when kids face setbacks as well. So, I just have this claim, this kind of if-then statement. If we don't allow young people to identify their own problems to solve and their own ways to solve them, then how could we possibly expect them to value their own creativity, right? To develop their creative confidence and to take the beautiful risk of trying something new and different. And so I've seen this as a university professor. I've seen this in working with young people that, and in my own parenting with my daughter, I've seen her confidence sometimes go down, right? That she has great ideas, but she's not willing to put them out there because she fears that maybe the teacher will give her a lower grade or other kids might, laugh at what she's doing. So I think it's really important that we kind of support kids and give them opportunities. So if it's not happening in school, give them some opportunity where they really can identify their own problems to solve and their own ways to solve them. That's really the best direct way to establish creative confidence. And it also involves kind of supporting their creative self-awareness. So what do I mean by that? Well, like I mentioned about the chemistry lab safety rules, there's a time and a place for creativity. It's not always beneficial, safe, or wise to do something different when there is a very efficient and effective way for doing it. And so I think there is this idea of a time and a place for creativity, and maybe your own child has experienced doing something different and unexpected and getting in trouble for it, right? I think anybody that has parented has experienced that with their child. I certainly have with my daughter. School was always kind of a challenge for her with respect to that. So when she was in preschool, she had a flatulence, right? And she mentioned, oh, excuse me, I had a poop bubble. So the teacher was not happy with that because there was a rule of no potty talk. But when she was telling me that story in the car ride home, I laughed and she said, I don't understand, Daddy. You think this is funny, but my teacher was upset with me. And so we had to talk about, context, right? In the context of the car, I think that's hilarious. Poop bubble, that's fantastic. But, you have this rule in school of no potty talk. So it's not effective. Another example was, and this is what these beads are for, she was in this school in third grade and they had these, counting beads and so on. And in that school, they told the kids, and she remembers this clearly, that you can use any materials any way you want. So she took these expensive counting beads and bent them into a rainbow design and glued them to this construction paper. And she got in trouble for destroying school property. So, and then her response was, I thought you said I can use these counting beads any way I wanted. And so then, they thought she was kind of being disrespectful. So again, we had to have this conversation about, okay, there are these kind of expectations, and the school wasn't exactly clear because she took it very literally, but we had these conversations about how do you read the context. So in the field of creativity studies, we call this creative metacognition, but really it's just creative self-awareness. It's about having the skill. Accomplished creators know how to read the situation. They can read when is it going to be effective and successful and recognized to do something and rewarded to do something new and different, and when is it not worth the risk. And so just to give you kind of a little thought experiment that I often use here, if you were on a routine flight flying over a body of water and the captain came on and said, this is a routine flight, we're flying over a body of water, everything's going great, but I've been thinking about this creative water landing, I'm going to give it a shot right now. I think everyone on the plane would be very upset and would not be okay with that. But if the plane was in trouble, then by all means, pull out all the creative stops. So I think sometimes we have to remind our children, particularly if they do think differently and they do have all these ideas and they want to try them out and they want to share them, right? If they want to go from that mini C to little or even pro C, that we help them understand how to share that idea and when is the time appropriate to share that idea, right? So a kid who writes a beautiful poem during a math exam, that's not the context for doing that. But that doesn't mean they should never write poetry. They could write that in their language arts class, for example. Okay, So when do we need to be creative? Like I said, if there's a clear route from A to B and there's no need to change it, there's no impediments, then we really don't need to do things new or differently. However, if we hit an impasse and we encounter uncertainty, or what one of the early American pragmatists, Charles Peirce, talked about, a state of genuine doubt, where all of a sudden what used to work no longer works, then we need to think and act in different ways. So sometimes when we encounter uncertainty, that's a good time to be creative. And that's kind of a human survival instinct, but it's also the way people come up with new ideas, create new products, create new solutions, and can do things that can actually make the world a better place. The other time we need creativity is whenever we invite or design for uncertainty. So if we're trying to improve on something, so in creative teaching and learning, that's where we might, or at creative parenting, that's where you would invite, your child to, okay, you come up with your own recipe. Okay, so you're introducing uncertainty in that because you don't know what they're going to do, and they may not even know what they're going to do. But again, if we provide supports for doing that, then that can be a productive response to uncertainty. So that's the key. The first one is, how do we support their creative awareness so they can read the environment and know when it's worth taking the risk? The next thing is supporting their creative confidence. How do we actually build that confidence? I think there's two things we want to think about here. So one is this idea, and this is a shameless plug of a new book that I co-authored with a colleague from the Stanford Design School who works in K-12 settings, Laura McBain. We do a lot of work. She does a lot of work in design. I do a lot of work in schools around the world. And what we found is a lot of young people, one reason that they don't have confidence to share their ideas is because they're afraid that they might fail. They might be mocked, they might experience setbacks. And so this is something we found at Innovation House when I was directing Innovation House. My graduate student team and I found that a lot of students were just afraid that their idea wouldn't work out. Maybe it was too ambitious, or nobody's ever tried it before, so they were afraid to even try. So what we realized is, what if we kind of front loaded a conversation about failure at the outset? So anytime maybe you're asking, or your own child's been invited to do something really that's self-directed, something that they're interested in, and there's a chance always when you do creative work that there's going to be failure and setbacks. It's just part of the process. Maybe we could front load that with just sharing a couple stories about failure. I mean, slogans are great, like fail fast, fail forward, learn from your mistakes, but that kind of falls flat when your child experiences failure and whatever, something they're really passionate about. It can be really painful, and it's not fun. So I think we have to be honest about that. And one way to do that is to tell our own stories, or to get other stories of people that have experienced setbacks. And so what we decided to do at Innovation House, for example, is we brought in the second year students who already went through the process with us, and they told the first year students their favorite failures about their projects or their first year in college. And so you just describe an incident. And this is not like a therapy session. It doesn't have to be very self-revealing, other than just being honest about a time when you happen to fail. Maybe it was in, like the math class, or you tried out an innovative project, or you tried doing something new, but it didn't work. And then importantly, talk about how'd that feel, right? I think it's important that kids know that, sometimes the creative process, doing things differently, it can be really lonely, painful, embarrassing, but you could still learn from it, right? So even though you had this really painful experience, or this embarrassing experience, or at least uncomfortable experience, what did you learn from that? What did you learn about yourself? And why is this your favorite failure? And it's often because they are able to carry it forward. So that's something to think about. I think it's a good idea generally to let kids know that, when you do something new, you're going to probably at least hit some setbacks. You're going to have to learn how to pivot, right? So there's this tension between knowing when to persist and when to pivot. Persistence is great, but if you keep banging your head against the wall over and over again, you might need to pivot in a slightly different direction. That can maybe move you away from that. So I think helping them understand and anticipate that, and see it as, this is just another obstacle and you can work through it, right? You can do this. And other people have had similar setbacks, and they're able to kind of move forward from them, get information from them, that they learn about themselves and the task. One of my favorite quotes that kind of illustrates this is from Miles Davis, the American jazz great musician who did a lot of collaborative jazz ensembles. And what he would talk about in jazz is there's really no wrong note in jazz. It's if you hit a wrong note, it's the next note you play that determines if it's good or bad. So that's basically what this favorite failure thing's all about. You know, you're going to probably hit a wrong note for sure when you're doing creative work, when you're learning in life. So it's what you do next that determines whether it's good or bad. And I think that's a really powerful message. It's something I remind myself of as a parent and as an educator, that how can we kind of take this and move it into a positive direction. So another way we build then creative confidence, when we kind of help young people anticipate, and we ourselves as parents anticipate, like, okay, this might not work out. How are we going to be ready to support our children through this? Then we can move them into, okay, what would this look like? So again, another shameless plug for one of my books, but you don't need to buy the book. This is the essence of it right here. 4 questions. So when we talk about complex challenges, and that's really what we want young people to be able to have confidence in, that, you know, it's easy when everything's spelled out and you're just following what the teacher can do. And I think kids can get really good at the game of school. Even if the criteria aren't very clear, they've become good enough at school where they can usually kind of puzzle it out and say, okay, this is what the teacher wants me to do and how the teacher wants me to do it. But in life, there's a lot of complex challenges where there's a lot of uncertainty. That's what makes it complex. So I think we want to give young people, our children, an opportunity to identify a problem that they see as important. And maybe nobody else sees it as important. Maybe it's something that bothers them, or it's something they just want to do, right? It's something they really are interested in. And so we ask them, okay, identify a problem that matters to you, that you really care about, that you want to do something about, either because it bothers you or you're just really interested in it. And by the way, these are the 4 questions we used on Tuesday with that group of 7th and 8th graders. And so some of the kids in there, they identified problems like, well, you know what? I feel like there's a lot of issues with refugees when they leave one country and go to the other. They don't have resources. Some kids talked about suicide prevention. They talked about a variety of different topics that they cared about, right? That they wanted to do something about. So it was amazing to see them just in a few minutes come up with some really important, complex problems. And most importantly, be able to articulate, why does it matter, right? So part of it is, okay, you've identified this is something you want to do. You need to build a case. Why does it matter? Who cares, right? So particularly if you're going to need to partner with outside experts, and you're going to need resources, if you're going to take this to potential funders, whether that's, a GoFundMe campaign, or you're actually taking it to investors or a granting agency, you need to build the case of, why does this matter? So why is this a problem? How do you know it's a problem? Who does it impact? What's going to happen? Can you prognosticate? What's going to happen if you don't do anything about it? Will it get worse? Will it get better? How will you know? Right? And so I think being able to have that rationale and communicate, this is a problem and this is why it needs to be solved, and this is why I want to solve it. So helping them kind of be able to pitch their ideas. And again, we did this with the 7th and 8th graders. They had to pitch that in front of the class, and we gave them feedback on that as well. And so once they get that clear, then they can start thinking about, okay, what are we going to do about it? And I put we in there because young people are often going to have to partner with people that have resources, materials, and expertise. And because of things like Zoom, like we're on right now, it's very simple for a kid to get online, find an outside expert, and contact them and say, hey, I'm working on this project. I need an expert plumber, or I need an engineer, or I need a coder to help me with this. I'm interested in coding, but I'm not quite there yet. Can you, give me some resources, or can you join my team? Right. So again, being able to build the case for why this problem matters, and then build partnerships and come up with some solutions for what are you going to do about it. But I really want to stress the importance of the very first question, the problem. So in the field of creativity studies, problem finding is often the most challenging and most important component when it comes to creative solutions. If you find a good problem to solve, particularly one that other people don't see as a problem, and you're actually able to do something about it, that's when you can really make an impact. And so I think that's really important for young people to understand as well. And then the final one is, how are you going to make sure, I call this a legacy challenge, how are you going to make sure it's sustainable, that it makes a contribution? So if you start this project, but then you're no longer interested in it, can you make sure it carries on? Can you make sure it's actually making a positive, lasting contribution? Can you monitor that you're doing something that's not just fun or it's having unintended consequences, but is actually making a positive contribution that can live on? So if your kid's in 6th grade and they start, a project that's doing good in their school or community or beyond, then they maybe should partner with some 5th graders to take it over if they're no longer interested in doing that when they go on to middle school or high school or college and so on. So this little framework can be modified by parents to just do something like this, even 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a week, maybe just do a legacy challenge. It is absolutely amazing and inspiring to see what kinds of things even little tiny kids can come up with. Kindergartners, 1st graders, they might need a little more support, but they can certainly do something that they're proud of. And then they can say, I did that. I built that. That's the program I helped start, right? That's the company I helped start. So it's doable. Kids do this, and it's absolutely possible. So let's try it. Let's try to do this. So that's creative confidence. And then the final component of this is creative risk-taking. So it's great if kids see the value in their creativity and have the confidence. But in some of the research that I've done with some of my colleagues, what we found is even people that have a high level of creative confidence and value creativity, if they're not willing to take the risk, then it's going to go nowhere. So how do we help kids understand taking creative risks? And so every risk has potential hazards and potential benefits. So we want them to think through this risk-taking process. And I know as parents, it sometimes can be a little scary to think about, okay, are we encouraging our kids to take risks? Well, there's different kinds of risks. There's good risks. A good risk is when, of course, the benefits to the person outweigh the potential hazards. So we want our children to be able to ask for help when they need it. That's actually a sign of confidence. But a lot of kids worry that appears as incompetent. Like if I ask for a question, people aren't going to think I'm as smart as them or whatever the case may be. But we really need to support them and say, you know what? Actually, really accomplished, successful people, they ask for help when they need it. Right? So that's a good risk. Yes, it might feel like you come off as incompetent, or yes, there might be kids that think, well, I thought you were the smartest in this subject. They might get some flack from other people, but it's still a good risk because that potential hazard is outweighed by the potential benefit of actually learning and getting the help and support they need to move forward. So I think this is a really important thing to have this conversation about when to take good risks. There's also, of course, bad risks, right? That's when the hazards outweigh the potential benefits. So here we have some people deciding to feed a bear some peanut butter. Whatever potential benefits they might think, I think the hazards probably outweigh the benefits here. So again, this is something we want to help our young children and our adolescents understand that, some of those risks, let's just go through the potential hazards and benefits and think, is this a really good risk or is this potentially a bad risk, right? And sometimes a bad risk is not taking action when you can or should, right? So maybe sticking up for another kid that's getting picked on. It's a bad risk just to say, I'm not going to do anything about it, right? It could be more hazardous to others. Or maybe we do something that we think is beneficial to us, but it actually has a negative, unintended consequence on other people. So I think that's what we want to think about, this kind of principled approach to creative action. Can we think through what the potential unintended consequences are, and how can we monitor those to make sure that if we go in and we're trying to do something for a community or build something that it's not actually creating more harm than good? And then the final class of risk is what I call beautiful risks. And a beautiful risk is similar to a good risk, but what makes it beautiful, it's about doing something that may not work out, but has the potential to benefit the learning and lives of others. And so I think this is where it could be really powerful. So this is an example of a teenager, Natalie Hampton, who came up with an app because she herself experienced isolation in school and getting picked on and so on. And so what she decided to do, and one of the things she identified is one of the problems is, even though schools have all these anti-bullying programs and so on, what she noticed is like in these unsanctioned spaces like the lunchroom, there were just kids that would refuse to let her sit there. And that happens to a lot of kids. So they feel completely isolated. And so what she did is she came up with this app that could just say, hey, I don't have anybody to sit with today. Is anybody willing to sit with me? And then, there's kids, they could just do that kind of discreetly. And so she tried to solve this problem, not just for herself, but for others. So I think another thing we can inspire and encourage our children to do is think about, if you're going to do something, if you're going to do one of these creative projects, you're going to take one of these risks, try something that maybe can benefit the learning and lives of others in addition to yourself. So if you're going to create a company, that's great. It might make you money, but is it also going to do good in the world, right? So I think we want to think in that kind of principled way. And this was kind of our motto at Innovation House. It was, this might not work out, but we're going to learn from it. And we're going to do it because we think it's important and can actually improve the world, at least in a small way, if not a large one. Okay, so those are the three things: creative self-awareness, creative confidence, and the willingness to take beautiful risks, or at least good risks. But let's definitely move towards beautiful risks would be my little push here. So my point here is, and I want to open it up to questions and so on, is if we want to support young people in taking beautiful risks, let's start by taking them ourselves, right? And so part of this is sharing those stories of favorite failures, for example, of our own, encouraging our kids to do things where we feel like, you know what, I don't know if this is going to work out, but okay, let's try it, right? So I think that's the key thing. It's about structuring the uncertainty so that, it's not going to be chaos, but literally allowing our kids to do things where we ourselves don't know how it's going to turn out and they don't know how it's going to turn out. So let's take a few questions now, and we can kind of circle back and we can go a little bit deeper in some of these concepts. But right now I want to kind of open it up for some questions in the chat.
Well, at this point, we don't have any questions typed in there, but I actually have a question. I mean, we're coming theoretically out of this COVID situation. Have you found any solutions to restoring creativity in students that have become stifled because of COVID and because of the isolation over the past 2 years, year and a half-ish?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen some examples of people of doing things differently and actually becoming more creative because they did get to kind of step out of the raging river of school and work. So some people did kind of experience that, like, wow, maybe I'm going to learn a new musical instrument or start, baking bread. That seemed to be a big thing, or whatever the case may be. So there was some of that was happening. I think the isolation piece is key, that, sometimes it's easier online to, be bold and put something in a chat box or something like that. But then you get back to face. And so I think part of it, again, is creating these experiences where young people are tackling really complex challenges and they can't go it alone. It's just not feasible, that they're going to have to partner with somebody else. And so I think part of it is just saying, look, here's 5 experts in our area or, in the world. Just email a couple of them. What's the worst that can happen? And I think what we found is, what we used to do when we were working with young people, like at the university level, for example, we would sometimes, say, you can kind of mention us, and so they can see it's coming from a university and they might be more likely to respond. What we actually found is that folks were more likely to respond when the student themselves directly contact an expert and say, hey, I'm working on this problem, this project. I'm kind of stuck. Can you is there something I can read or watch or learn about? Or would you have 5 minutes to answer some of my questions? And you'd be amazed at how many experts out there, or people that just have the experience that the kids need, are willing to respond. And I think by doing that, it really builds their confidence that, you know what, these are just people too. And there are people here that are willing to help out. And so I think part of it is just encouraging kids, particularly when they're passionate about a project and they need assistance that we as parents can't provide, but we can maybe find people they can connect with. We can just sit with them and say, who can you ask, right? Who can you ask? Do you know somebody in your class? Can you ask one of your teachers? Do we know somebody in our family, some of our family friends? Or can we just go online and start looking for people who have the experience or expertise that can help us? Can we call somebody at Home Depot? Can we call a general contractor? And I think when we start doing that, yeah, there's going to be people that say, you know what, I don't have time for this. But I think what kids, and I think many of us are amazed that there are so many people that are willing to kind of help out, right? So I think part of it is helping kids have that confidence to reach out to other people that are going to support them, even if the other kids in school might not be interested in working with them. There's plenty of other folks out there that are willing to partner and bring these ideas into reality. That's a really great question. So I see another question in here.
Yep. How can we support? There you go. I'll ask you if you want.
Go
How
for
can
it.
we support a child with ADHD to take a beautiful risk? They're busy trying to follow school rules and can become hesitant to take a risk.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I think sometimes students who are attention divergent, which can be great for creativity because they're attending to and thinking about so many different things. And then they are really busy and really trying to focus on, adhering to school rules and constantly getting reminded to kind of meet those rules. And so it becomes one of those things where it feels really risky because they've experienced sometimes, particularly in places that are really constrained, they get that kind of negative experience with risk where they thought, it's kind of like with my daughter. She thought she was, using these school materials any way she wanted. That's what the school said. And now she's, being told she's destroying school property. And then, when she shares her, in good faith, I thought you said I could do anything. It was perceived as being disrespectful or talking back or something. So yeah, I think kids can get burned a lot like that. And they're just doing it in good faith, but it's not being received that way. So I think having these kinds of conversations about that and saying, well, let's talk about some things, sometimes when you tried something out and it didn't work out, and why is that the case? And then I think that's where we can talk about this time and a place. This is about creative awareness first. We just have to let kids know that there are some situations where their ideas, no matter how brilliant they are not going to be recognized or rewarded and might actually be stifled, right? So I think that's a really important conversation to realize that it may not work in this context, but maybe we could do something outside of school, right? So I think the beautiful risk is really about, and I think what's inspiring about kids and what was really inspiring to see with that group of 7th and 8th graders I just spent a few moments with on Tuesday was they really were concerned about helping others. And that's what a beautiful risk is about. A beautiful risk is about doing something that's going to potentially benefit the learning lives of others. So what I've found is that young people, if you frame it that way, then they're going to be more likely to say, yeah, you know what, it might not work out for me. People might think this is not a great idea. They might laugh at me. They, whatever, they might not want to support me initially. But it's really important because it could really help these other folks. I think that's if kids can start thinking beyond the self, then I think they can really push through sometimes. They can have that kind of persistence. So that's what I mean by unshakable sense of possibility thinking. In that book, What If, it's titled What If, and that whole kind of legacy challenge thing is really about asking what if. So if it didn't work this way, we should just have this unshakable sense of what if. Well, what if we tried this? What if we tried that? What if we tried this? Right? I think you can use what if in a way that is inspiring. And it's very different than saying why. So you could try this in your own personal life. You could say, instead of saying, why don't you help me with the dishes? You could say, what if you help me with the dishes? It's just one suggestion. So I think you can give really honest feedback to your child and say, well, what if you tried this? It didn't work out here, but what if we tried it here? And I think just having this unshakable sense of saying, okay, if this is really important to you and you're not getting any traction at school or in this after school club or with your friends, what if we looked somewhere else? What if we found somewhere or a group of folks that are willing to support this idea? What if we worked on this idea to make it more compelling, right? So I think that's one way to approach that, particularly for kids who have a lot of ideas, but maybe have been burned in the past and are really kind of fearful of seeing everything as a potential hazard. They're not able to see the potential benefits. And that's where I think the beautiful part of that is saying, well, you know what, it's not really about you anyway. You're trying to help other people. So if you really care about that, then I think we need to find other ways. So what if we keep trying, right? What if we adjust this a little bit? So there's different ways of doing that. I can share some materials. There's a little protocol. It's a little possibility thinking protocol that really is a great way to provide feedback to your kid. Even sometimes it's difficult to hear feedback about their idea and let them really dig in, because sometimes kids will identify a problem that's really the symptom of a deeper problem. So part of what this feedback protocol is about is flipping assumptions. So maybe a problem they see as a huge problem is really a small problem. Or maybe a problem they see as something that they're facing is actually a social problem or something like that. So it's just flipping different assumptions and helping them think in a much more nuanced way, including sometimes it's important to pivot rather than persist. So I think playing with that tension. Okay, so you're persisting here, or you're afraid to even try, but what if we pivot a little bit and we try it in a different context? Are you willing to try it here? So yeah, it's a difficult thing. There's no easy answers to this, but I think you can approach it with this possibility thinking. So thank you for that question, Deborah. Other comments, questions, thoughts?
Do you find this works better with the middle school and high schoolers, or is there just a different type of response when you're working with the younger students?
I think it works with all ages. It's just about, knowing the kids you're working with. And as parents, you obviously know your kids. So with littler kids, it's really about providing more structure. So the thing to think about here is creativity is really about, it's like I mentioned, it's kind of constrained or structured originality. So with littler kids, it's often better to provide a little bit more structure around it. So you can just start out by saying, okay, let's talk about a problem that we're going to solve together. Like, what are we going to make for dinner? Or can we make something that's going to help other people in our community? And so maybe you can structure that and say, I have a couple ideas, but we don't have to use my ideas. Do you have some ideas, right? So you're giving them some kind of entry point. So they might not know even where to start. They want to do something, right? Little kids still have great ideas, but they might need a little help, a little bit more structure getting started. So they might start on something, well, they'll say, well, let's try something you had an idea. And then you can keep asking them. So is there a way we can maybe change this idea that I had? Do you want to make it a little bit different? I know you're interested in video games or horses or whatever. Can we mash that up? So a powerful thing that we did with that group of 7th and 8th graders that works really well with little kids too, is if you have a problem or task, you ask them to mash that up with something they're interested in. So that's what we did with the 7th graders, but you could do this with little kids as well. So the kid that was interested in doing something to help out the refugees, for example, refugees that have left their home country, they're in a different country and they're out of resources. This kid was interested in music. And so what we did is we invited kids to just list out all the things they're interested in or are good at, and then just start matching it up with the problem. And so what they were able to come up with is this blend between music and helping out refugee families. Was this idea. First, it started out with, well, this kid can maybe do some busking and the money earned by, street corner coffee shop performances could be donated. But as we started bringing in other voices, right, we started getting feedback from the group in this kind of what if possibility thinking exercise. Then one other student in the class said, well, what if you reached out to companies like Spotify or, Apple Music or Pandora, and for their premium subscribers, maybe they'd be willing to spend a month of donating some portion of the premium subscription to your cause, right? And so that's where it starts coming together. So this kid's interested in music and it starts evolving. And this is where you really then start working on the idea, like, okay, you're going to have a really good pitch if you're going to reach out to somebody at Spotify or Apple Music. You're going to have to really be able to communicate what the problem is and why it matters. And then you can have the ask, right? So these kids, in just a few minutes, were starting to get there. They started realizing they could scale this up and go beyond just local music performance. It doesn't mean they would abandon that. They could still get local musicians and themselves, if they play music, to donate proceeds that they kind of earn through donation. But they could also start reaching out to these corporations and actually have a pitch and get some portion of a premium subscription. And that's kind of a win-win for the corporations as well as the project. So that kind of thing can happen with little kids. It's just, as the parent, you just have to do a little bit more of the legwork, including maybe engaging in some of that possibility thinking. So I think part of it is to always challenge yourself and your child to +1 this idea. And that's what those 7th graders did. They started out with, okay, I could play music at a local coffee shop and earn, some money, and I can donate that. And then we start +1ing it. Can we scale this up? How can we generate even more funds? And that's where you go to companies that are generating a lot of revenue and might be able and willing to donate that.
You mentioned earlier that with Zoom, these students have the opportunity and technology to reach much further than we did before. I mean, you go back to, write a letter to some corporation, and we all know it was ending up in a circular file. But I really do think with these new connections, not just email, but all these other online platforms where you have the ability to reach people that we could never talk to before. I mean, you think about those YouTube videos where somebody is, doing a cover song of some artist, and somehow the artist sees it and replies back directly to them. That would never have happened, 10 years ago, let alone 5 years ago. So are you finding that in the past, just even 12 months, that you are hearing about more of these connections? I don't know if that school you were talking about that you participated in, is that still going, or are you seeing this multiplying more?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's a great example. The new lead singer of Journey became the lead singer of Journey for that very reason that you just described, right? So I think there is more awareness about that. And I think people are more comfortable with this kind of modality. And so it is possible that, a kid could do a project pitch to a company. It could be in their own community or beyond, and just set that up. And it's really about just, if you're going to do something overseas, maybe you just have to get up really early or stay up really late to do the pitch, but it's still possible. Or you could record it, right? You could put your pitch on YouTube, or, GoFundMe or Kickstarter or something like that. And so I think there are so many possibilities. There's examples of this. So, I mentioned my colleague, Laura McBain. She used to be at one of the high-tech high schools in California, and it was a very project-based school. And there was a group of kids that wanted to put together a food truck. They were really interested in doing a food truck, and they got their food handling license. But, the school can't buy a food truck. It's a minimum of like $30K or something, and as a minimum at that time. And so these kids were able, with the teachers, to do a kind of a Kickstarter, and sure enough, they were able to raise the money like that. And the next thing you know, they have this truck in the parking lot, right? So it's doable, right? It's just, and so when I told those 7th graders and 8th graders, and I say this to all young people, is, it's something that other, entrepreneurs and inventors have always said: if it doesn't defy the law of physics, it's doable. It's just a matter of getting the resources and having the will to bring it into fruition, right? And so we did a little thought exercise where we talked about, imagine if everything disappeared that was made by humans, and how would you build one of your favorite technologies from the ground up? That would be a pretty daunting task. And the students were like, yeah, it would take hundreds of years. But we don't have to start from scratch. I think that's the other thing kids need to realize is, the resources are there, the people are there. It's really about having the will and the persistence to keep asking and keep pushing. And it's amazing how many times that comes through. Sometimes it doesn't, because, the idea isn't quite formed yet. But that's a learning experience, right? So then you just say, okay, we're going to pivot. So something I did at Innovation House is, there were students that would work all year on a project, but I let them at the 11th hour, literally the day before their final culminating public presentation of their project, they could change their entire project. And some of them did. And one group changed their project midstream, and they just had to tell the story. Why did you change it? How'd you come up with this new project? And that was the project they changed to. Actually just got funded recently, some nutritional bar, and they got funders, and they're going to start producing these things, right? So it's interesting how, you don't have to hold on to an idea when there's a better idea that you can pick up. So, but there's a tension there, right? So I think we have to help our children know when to persist and when to pivot. And there's no kind of magic awareness of that other than you've persisted, it's going nowhere, nowhere, nowhere. Maybe you need to pivot a little bit, just make a little modification. Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
I was just going to add that today I was watching a group of fourth graders do science experiments, and we brought in the what if. What if you could take this beyond Friday's science fair? What would you do different? You know, how would you turn this into something to help other people? And just turning that one question. I mean, we went on for like an extra hour. The teacher was so like just excited at how that one question and being open to take advantage of the time really propelled their students to think beyond that single assignment.
Yeah, it's a powerful question. And I think if we follow that question up with, okay, you've identified some interesting what ifs. Now, which one of these are we going to commit to? So that's the other thing we do whenever we do these exercises with young people, whatever age they are. It's great to generate great ideas, but a great idea falls flat unless you bring it into reality. So it's like, okay, what's the first step we can take to make this thing possible? And so there's examples of little kids. There's a school in California where they were learning about endangered species and so on, and they realized that there was this shrimp, right, by their school that was kind of endangered. And so there was a kid that said, well, what if we did something about it? And they built a watershed, and it just became this kind of legacy. Other kids from generation to generation came on and kept working on that project. So there's examples of this kind of thing where it's about what if opens up the possibilities, and then the next step is, okay, can we commit? What's the first step we can take? Let's pick one of these ideas that seems feasible that can get us one step closer to making this what if a reality. Because what if is just a horizon of possibilities. You have to go through that, prune those down, right? You have to prune those ideas down and find the ones that seem feasible and start taking action on those. And then sometimes you have to go back to the drawing board. But that's an exciting process. And I think when kids do that, it's super memorable. It's what people want to see. I know a lot of times kids are focused on getting good grades, and that's fantastic. But kids that are applying to college, everyone has, decent grades or whatever. What college admission officers want to see is, what have you done that's interesting? I mean, imagine doing a project that actually does something in your community, and that's in your application. I mean, there was a recent news story about a kid in Chandler, and he just kind of jumped on an existing project where it's about getting shoes to kids whose family can't afford it, and getting every single kid in that elementary school a pair of shoes. This is a high school kid, right? But little kids could do this kind of thing too. And so he did fundraisers. Now he's thinking about coming up with like a 5K. So, I mean, imagine that. It's great that, yeah, okay, I was in some extracurriculars. I crushed the SAT. I did this and that. But could you be doing something, there's kind of this, there's only a limited amount of time. So yeah, some things might take a hit a little bit, but wow, what if you really did something that you can point to and say, I did that, I built that, that's happening right now, that's helping feed families in need, that's, whatever the case may be, that's addressing a problem that was a real problem in my school, whatever it is. I started this company and this is what we're doing. So I think those kinds of things are doable. Kids do it. Every kid could do that with the support, with the will and the support. So I think let's just that's what I'm saying. We need to take the beautiful risk of believing in ourselves and our own children and say, let's give it a shot and see what happens. What's the worst going to happen? It's not going to work out, but we're going to learn something about it. It'll be a good story at the very least, right? Anything else? Any parting thoughts, comments?
Thank you so much. This was incredible. We got comments just saying super interesting. Thank you. I've got a senior going to college and doing those college applications and those scholarship essays. And, you're absolutely right? If there had been something that was done that is outside the box like that is impacting more people than just themselves, it is a huge plus.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it's not too late, you could start that right now, right? So, so that's what I just want to leave with, is this idea of like, let's make sure we continue to take and encourage beautiful risks in our children. And I think it's just so amazing to see when you turn that over to them, because I think we just overstructure so much. My dog's now wanting a treat. We overstructure so much that it can be amazing when you just kind of remove some of that structure and let the kid come in and do their own thing. So thank you all so much.
Oh, so one of
Take
the
care.
parents that was in the class on Tuesday said thank you. Their son enjoyed the visit, and they were both inspired. So
Awesome. Well, hopefully he'll continue that work. So that's fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking
All
the
right.
time.
Thank you all. Take
Appreciate it.
care. Bye-bye.